There is a lot of crap going on in the world today. And I have decided that sometimes you can say crap from the pulpit. And I am tired of it always being a fight. It feels like there is always a fight, always something that we need to do and fix in this world. But these are the biggest and most important fights that we have. We're facing now one of the top humanitarian crises in the world today with the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. We are facing so much death and destruction in Haiti from the earthquakes, throughout the entire world with COVID and this Delta variant. It just keeps coming. And I find myself saying that we shouldn't have to fight so much. We shouldn't have to fight for women to have equality and the same place in the world as men. We shouldn't have to fight that everyone of every skin color be treated with honor and respect, or for basic health care for everyone, or for all children to have equal access to quality education. We shouldn't have to fight, but these are the fights worth having. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless, poor into your house? Those are the words of our prophet Isaiah. So I think the biggest problem is not that we don't agree on what's wrong with the world. I think most of us can look around and see what is wrong and what needs to be fixed. We just sometimes vastly have differing ideas on how to go about doing it. And what that means is that all too often, because there are so many different opinions and ideas, we start to see people as the evil ones. We start to look at one another and say, you are wrong. You are bad. But listen to the epistle today. Listen to Paul's words. Our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. There are forces of good in this world. That's why we're here. There are beautiful, wonderful forces of good, and there are forces of evil. And all of humanity is susceptible to all of it. This isn't the devil walking around with horns and a pitchfork, and we can point and say, there's the bad guy. It's more like what theologian Walter Wink considers to be the anti-creation forces hidden within corporate identities, or I would add, at times, hidden within ourselves. Those are those spiritual powers that Paul is talking about. These forces that tend to destroy creation rather than build it up, to tend towards chaos rather than coherency. And the problem is that while it's easy to identify a horned devil with a pitchfork, we don't get that. We don't get to point at one person or thing and say, that's the evil thing. Instead, we have to work at identifying these forces of anti-creation and chaos. And that means we always have to be alert and checking ourselves and saying, am I doing what I mean to be doing? Is this choice that I've made what I intended for it to be? And it's difficult. It is so difficult because there is almost always a mix of good and bad in everything. And so it's often so hard to decide what to do. And it is easy to be fraught with anxiety over where these spiritual forces of evil are going to manifest and how. But it is so crucial to remember that Paul tells us our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against one another, but those wiles of the devil, as he writes. And that means we don't have to fight each other. Our enemies are not Democrats or Republicans, Christians or Muslims, black or white. Our enemies are those anti-creation forces that we are all susceptible to. And we are also all susceptible to those forces of good. And if we can remember that each and every one of us, no matter where we live or what we look like, are susceptible to forces of good, then we can see that good and identify it, and we can start to lose focus on the forces of evil. And what's best is that we have God-given tools that can aid us in this fight. And Paul lists those for us too. So we have truth and righteousness, the gospel of peace, faith, salvation, and the Spirit, or the Word of God. Now, Paul assigns attributes to these, all of these things as being the armor of God. But I want to abandon that imagery. I want to get rid of the battle metaphors, because though nearly all of what Paul lists is defensive battle equipment, you are still preparing for war. And so I want to try something different. If we want to assign these tools that God has given us to something tangible, then let's try what Deacon Genevieve and I were talking about earlier. She reflected and said, what if a woman who in Paul's time wouldn't be using armor, what if a woman wrote this passage? Perhaps then we'd have the broom of truth, or the sewing needle of righteousness, or the lipstick of the Spirit, the Word of God. Thinking of the armor of God using an entirely different metaphor breaks open what is at the heart of Paul's message. And it transforms this image of defense against violence with the potential for retaliation into practical application using whatever tools you have on any given day. And aside from that, I'm pretty sure I could write lots of pages on the broom of truth and the lipstick of the Spirit. There's a commentary written by Archie Smith Jr. that ties all of this together, I think. Paul, in our epistle, writes that we have to stand firm in these tools. Stand firm in the truth, in the gospel of peace, in righteousness. And Smith writes that this means being willing to be humble and to risk being unpopular, even to suffer ridicule or worse, as a faithful person in a community of faith. A stubborn person will not listen to ideas that differ from his or her own. A stubborn posture which is different from standing firm, rejects alternatives out of hand, and refuses, regardless of the situation, to change one's position. It's enshrined in a closed circle of certainty, and it becomes fearful, boisterous, one-dimensional. But standing firm is different. Standing firm means that one is willing to debate, to listen, and consider alternatives in order to reach a beneficial goal, while at the same time not sacrificing basic principles. So in essence, it is okay to change your mind if the arguments of the people you're talking with and listening to make sense and hold to the basic tenets that you adhere to. It's okay to compromise and to work with people who have opposing viewpoints, so long as you aren't sacrificing an essential truth that you adhere to. This also means that we might find ourselves at times standing with our brooms of truth, facing off against people we love. But that term, facing off, is a battle term, right? So instead of picturing this as people lined up with their brooms of truth on opposite sides of one another, maybe we picture it instead as standing around a circle with other people who have goodness inside them. And you're standing there and you are sweeping your truth back and forth. And yes, sometimes that dust and that dirt is going to just go one side and then back and then to another side and back. And it's going to feel like that's all you're doing. But if you're in a circle and you are working together, then before long, there's going to be a pile of dust in the center. And then you can see how to work together and get rid of some of that evil. We just can't stop sweeping.